These times are just a bit, well, not a bit, but they're very unusual. None of us really were prepared for what we're facing now. And I wanted to ask you on these new normals, like there's a new normals in our life, like trying to emulate your workspace at home, for example. Um, what new normals do you actually think we should keep after this crisis is over? What do you think?
I think that we need to understand that we cannot basically take what we had before and just try and put it into the new area of our life or the new situation. And I think that at least when it comes to the teachers, I think that this situation has acted as a catalyst of things. So I think that everything that wasn't working about education is being highlighted by this situation. But at the same time, everything that is good about education and why education is necessary has also become more and more visible. Like parents who most of the time work with schools and with teachers to share the common goal of educating children, but who also despised of teachers and education have come to realize how important education is to society. And uh, I think that us as teachers also need to sit down and take, very careful inventory of our skills. And basically, what I would advise teachers to do is think of their own skills as something that should belong in three buckets. So, bucket number one is outdated practices, things that are no longer useful, teacher centered approaches that cannot work neither on a physical nor on a virtual environment, um, memorization for the sake of memory, um, and rote practice, like when you do math. Remember when we did algebra in high school that we had like 200 exercises to do? All of those are outdated practices that we need to put in a bucket. Let's call it bucket number one, outdated. Bucket number two are those practices that we call classic. They are classical because they worked for us in the past and they still work for us in now. Like collaborative learning, like more learner centered approaches, like mm, all of the things that we've discovered that worked for us 15 years ago, and if we apply them, they still work for us. Like storytelling, for example. Storytelling has existed since the beginning of times. That's part of civilization, that's part of who we are, telling stories. And that's going to work. If you want to engage students in a Zoom call, you're going to need to tell them a story, to give them a narrative that they can relate to. So those practices that have worked for us in the past and that are still useful, you put in bucket number two. Those are classics. It's like the canon of teaching. And then in bucket number three, you're going to put those practices that we haven't tried enough yet. Augmented reality, virtual reality, flipped learning. Um, and there are practices that you hesitate because for many traditional teachers they are going to be novel, but they have been out there for a while, like project-based learning, for example. So for some teachers, if they've used it in the past and it works for them, it will go into the bucket of the classics. But for some teachers, it will go into the bucket of the contemporary practices, things that we need to give a try. And digital learning for many teachers will probably go into this third bucket. So, as a teacher who is facing this, and in general, I would just, take stock of my teaching practices, do an inventory and say, okay, this no longer works for me in this particular scenario, bucket number one. It has worked for me and it will continue working for me in this new scenario, bucket number two. What haven't I tried? Or just, I've tried, but I'm still not completely confident with or confident about. I'll put it in bucket number three and start planning your lessons using those. And that's like the one thing that I would do. Second thing that I would do is do less, but do it better. Many teachers walked in and out of classes and barely had time for lesson planning. I would do less with my students on a face-to-face basis, but I would plan it so carefully. And I would team up with other teachers to plan my lessons if I can, and if the school allows it. And dear God, let the schools allow for more professional learning communities. So that would be like the other thing that I would do. And number three, I would work with school authorities to help them understand how changes and more careful planning and more thoughtful planning and assessment of lessons needs to take place. I think that those would be like my three big things, Juliancito.